Thank you very much. So today is going to be equally amazing, and we're starting off with, a big bang, because we've got Simon Parkes, and he is, many people will know, I've interviewed him several times. He's a really interesting guy, a former British councillor, as you call them, having held a political office for a number of years and having quite a career in that area. Things were looking very good for him until he started talking about his, what he believes to be his ET heritage, in essence. So, and I guess they've taken a dive since then in terms of, or at least he voluntarily, I'm not sure, he would have to tell you all the machinations that went on, but somehow he slowly withdrew from the political scene and devoted himself really to this sort of subject and to awakening people, etc. So now he is in full swing in that world, or this world, so to speak. So we're very lucky to have him, and I want to welcome Simon Parkes.
Okay, so first of all, thank you ever so much for welcoming me. As just Kerry mentioned about the political side of it, I was a Labour councillor in the London Borough of Hackney. I served 2 terms of office. The leader of the council knew about my experiences but asked me not to speak about them. I was on track for quite a reasonable political career. I was chair of the Housing Services Committee, I was chair of the Direct Labour Service Committee. What actually happened was that I decided to move to Whitby, North Yorkshire, and I thought, well, I've worn the t-shirt, I'm not going to do this anymore. But the Labour Party came back to me, wanted more, so I got back in, and this time at local level, town council level, and I did that for a term of office. But what I found was that the deeper I got into politics, regardless of what political party it is, the harder it is to maintain your independence under the system. It doesn't matter what political party. If you have a principle and you have a view, you find that compromise is everything. But there comes a point where you have to decide, and I had to decide, where my true allegiance lay. Which means that under the current system that we have, democracy is a name which we understand, but that's not really what we've got, ladies and gentlemen. But under the democratic system, it is very difficult to maintain a honesty and a truth, either to this country or to the people of the country, because there is a third force that exists that wishes to subvert both. And if you wish to obtain high office under the current system, you can't actually be truthful to both of those. You'd have to give them up to do that. If I said to you that at least half of the current politicians are corrupt, that would be truthful. That would be truthful. Many of them are blackmailed. Many of them are frightened. Many of them are good men and women, but they are just fearful. So nobody asked me to resign. I just decided that I had to make a decision where my true allegiance lay. So I left a promising career. For those of you who've seen me before, you know that I give presents out. I'm not doing it this time simply because there have been so many difficult and upsetting things that have occurred that it's not really appropriate. Out of deference to certain situations that have occurred, I'm not going to go into huge detail. However, I do have to cover some elements of what's happened. But we're going to do it in a very sensitive way. Right. I've entitled today's talk Endgame. This is the second conference. I was at Birmingham yesterday, and I did the exact same conference at Birmingham. It was a much smaller conference. It was more of a new age esoteric group, and I was just happy to support both ends of our industry. So you've got Kerry here, who does the cutting edge, interviews people who are going to say things that are challenging, things that many unawake people perhaps need to hear but find very difficult. And then what I did yesterday was with a much more softer group, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I think it's important that speakers don't just stay with the same genre. I think it's important to meet out and mix with people of different groups, otherwise we're going to become very tunnel visioned. So this is called End Game because we're in the end game. Now, I don't know, for the last 20 years people have been saying it's nearly there, we're in the end game. But we really are. There are some important changes occurring, and those people who hold any position in authority, whether that's through the establishment or not, will be aware of a change, and those of us who are psychic or those of us who are spiritual will also know there's a great change, and we're just at the tipping point now. The question is whether it's an easy transition or not, and a lot of the problems we're having at the moment are because we have a... Well, that's interesting. Have the Samsung television, and our 128 pages online of instruction manual, and on page 124, and those of you who know me know that I don't make things up, and on page 124 of this online manual it says be aware that this device will record your conversations if you're within 12 feet of it, and if you don't wish this, then don't talk within 12 feet. It says that. If you're not happy with this, return it to your retailer. That's what it says, and they've buried it on page 124 of my particular version. So who is going to take their television back? And there are a number of models of Samsung phones that do the same. And in fact it made it, I think, to headlines. It was interesting that President Trump authorised the release of that information something like 2 months ago. So that actually made it onto the British newspapers, I think it might have been the Daily Express, front page, because Trump had authorised that the public were aware that Samsung were recording information. Now, what happens is that basically you go to a store, you see, I don't know, a new kitchen, you talk about it with somebody, you go back and then you go on Facebook and, oh look, there's the advert for that kitchen for the same store. Because if you have your cell phone or your mobile phone with you, they know exactly which store you've been in. Because they say it can detect you within so many meters. That's not actually true. It can detect you within 30 centimeters, within 1 foot. But they don't tell you just how close it is. But if that was it, we wouldn't like it, but we would understand that we're in a capitalist system. However, that information is also being sold onto security services. I recently wrote to Sky and said, I don't want the contract anymore, I don't watch television, I really don't want this. Since then, that was a year ago, I have had 7 letters from British Telecom saying, would you like to join our alternative system? Which means that Sky sold the fact that I had written and cancelled to BT. Now that's what these organisations do, they sell our information for money. And we're going to be talking about money a little bit. So this is an end game, and it's a positive end game. We're not staring down the barrel of a gun. I do have to talk about this. Can anybody tell me what Grenfell Tower shares with the Twin Towers? Sorry, shout out.
Inside job.
That's really good. We're going to be very careful what we say today. I'm just going to stick to facts.
Planning. More planning.
Yeah, that's right. It's not the answer I want. Come on.
Death.
Yes. Exactly.
Premeditates to look like another.
It's a tower.
Yeah. Actually, that's closer than you think. Right, I'm going to tell you that just before 9/11, the Twin Towers were reinsured. Do you know that Grenfell Tower was reinsured just before? Grenfell Tower was reinsured exactly in the same fashion, except a little bit longer, with a Norwegian company. And the Norwegian company also, interestingly enough, it was written in to compensate for deaths, not just the building. So there will be a payout of just under £1 billion. Now that's something that's factual, and that's what I want to get into here. I'm going to just do something here, and we're just going to come back to it. I know my writing's not good, but you can make out I've just written the name of the tower. I'm going to come back to that. What does it not share with the Twin Towers?
enough collapse.
It didn't collapse.
That's the right answer. Didn't fall down. And for those of you who watched, there were a couple of commentators who said we're really worried because the tower might fall down. And then there was a commentator who said, just spoken to the fireman and he's told me it won't fall down because it's made of concrete. Right, so that's, just hold that name up there for a minute, will you? We'll come back to that. It would have been too obvious. We have to be very careful what we say because lots of people have lost their lives and it's a very difficult situation, so we're going to be very, very careful today. This is the fire. Unlike any ordinary fire, you can see immediately that it's external. You know, I mean, the day after this tragedy, I gone onto my website and got Andy Bale, who runs my website, to say that we need manslaughter charges. The first person to actually call, there was no newspapers calling for this, they were all terrified of it. I said we need corporate manslaughter charges, and if you go on our website you'll see that. Because I knew that there was something very, very wrong here, and that's exactly what's happening now. It's taken them a long time, but that's happening. And when you look at the pattern of the fire, it's not in a line, it's going up. For those of you who've ever lit the blue touch paper on a firework, you notice that it smoulders. It doesn't actually burn in a line, it sort of goes in a wobbly line, a wavy line. Just bear that one in mind. Here are a set of pictures, we all know them. We're not glorifying this at all. We're just looking at the way that the fire moves across on the outside of the building. It's very clearly an external fire which is causing an internal fire. The tower was constructed in 1974. Can anybody else tell me what was created in 1974? See, if I had presents today, you'd get them. Look at the fire on the outside of that. Look very carefully at the external flames. When you've had a good look at that, look at the V shape. Now I'm going to go to this one. Okay, it's in reverse, but let's just nip back again. Look at that. Now look at this. I don't believe in coincidences, but that's all we're going to say on this, because of deference for people who have suffered. Alright, okay, well we'll come back. That name is still staying up there. I and many other commentators have talked to as many people as would listen to us, how Hollywood and not so Hollywood use their medium, whether that's film or theatre, poetry, to try to either warn people of what's coming or to get approval for what's coming. And we need to understand the difference between obtaining approval and trying to warn you. And that really depends on the director, he or she, and which organisations they are linked in with. We talked about Gene Roddenberry, who made Star Trek, and how his first experience was on a domestic flight in the States, and how he saw an alien spacecraft out of the window from his air seat, and then he went back and joined a group of channelers and received channeled information. And that's why he created Star Trek, because he was creating it on the information he was receiving. And a number of film directors now are going out into our community and trying to pick the brains of people quite legitimately for ideas, and that's a brilliant way to get information across. The two Polish brothers who did The Matrix, they didn't just make that up, they received that information. So much of that was accurate, and that's one of the most accurate films that have been out for a very long time. And then you take the other end of it, which is Arnold Schwarzenegger's films, which were about trying to get approval. So we're going to tell you what the timeline is that we're manipulating, and we need your approval. And the approval means that you don't say anything. So in the laws that they operate, if you keep quiet, that's approval. And there have been a number of commentators, and Mr. Shrimpton was one of them, who try to warn people and sometimes pay a heavy price for it. But if you warn, then that can stop that happening. And that's not widely understood. The difficulty is that if you cry, I can't say the name of the animal because unfortunately the name of the animal is a trigger word. We can't use that animal name, but there's a very common saying that if you cry, name of the animal, a number of times, then what happens is that people stop believing you. So personally I have to be very careful to choose something that I can warn people about that's so important that even when they say to me, well, it didn't happen, and it seems a cop-out to say to them, well, actually it didn't happen because we spoke about it. And people can't get that, and they think, well, it didn't come true. So it is very difficult. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things. We're very familiar with this one. We all know it. Now, what that tells us straight away is that whoever is behind The Simpsons is receiving information. Now, are they trying to warn us, or are they trying to get approval? Perhaps the jury's out on that, but we'll start with what we know. The two pictures, I'm going to enlarge one of them on the right-hand side, are not so well known. There's an enlargement. Now that's not so well known. And that was in 1997. So there we've actually got, behind the couple, a painting of a burning tower. So I'm not so sure this is warning people. I think it's more about I want your approval, because it's been very direct. So that one we're not so familiar with. Has anybody seen the cartoon Bart to the Future? A few people. So it's a parody on Back to the Future, obviously. The year 2000. So in the year 2000, the creators, I know, I'm sorry I'm standing here, but I'm worried about sending the microphone mad. In the year 2000, somebody predicted Trump would be president. Now, the guy who directed it was actually interviewed on this subject, and it came out with a crass answer, which was, oh well, I just picked on the person who was the most unlikely. No, there are far more unlikely people. So that means that 17 years before the occurrence, the timeline had already been looked at. Now, it doesn't mean the elite managed the timeline to make President Trump get the position. What it means is that they foresaw this and were not able to change it. All right, because they were all behind Hillary Clinton. All of that type of elite were behind Hillary Clinton. But one arm, anyway, of the elite foresaw 17 years ago that Trump would become president. But they've shared it with the makers of The Simpsons.
Yeah.
So that means that we need to look at The Simpsons very carefully, because the information we're going to gain from them is actually vital. I didn't put the red arrow in, I think we all know who's who. Many of these drawings or cartoons were done after the event. Okay, so this one you're looking at here was not done prior. The reason I'm showing it is because whoever's in charge of The Simpsons is taking a great interest in Trump. And this one was done after the event. There's a lot of talk on YouTube, but this was done after the event. But the reason that they're doing it is because they've got a very important message, and it's coming up here. I just want to let you know that on the journey, not this morning, but yesterday, there are Saturday drivers. We always get odd things, but we had 3 things occur. 2 which were manageable, and the third one nearly hit. And I will talk about it. At the roundabout, car on the left-hand side, indicating left to turn left, decided then to suddenly swing right, still indicating left, and if I hadn't have done a very harsh brake, would have been straight into the side of me, as was a few years ago. I do not believe that was a coincidence, and that was after I'd done the talk at Birmingham. And I think it's to do with Grenfell Tower, because very few commentators live like this are talking about it. Most people are doing it on YouTube and then doing it that way. So that was interesting. But I want to talk about The Simpsons simply because the image that I want to show you is one that's not widely known, and it caused me to write to President Trump a couple of weeks back, and I put on the website that I'd let him know. The murder of President Trump is predicted to occur in October of this year. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but there will be an attempt to assassinate President Trump in October. The drawing here doesn't tell us October. I know it's October, but there you go. You've got a drawing there. The 7 roses through the window are very important. I don't understand what they mean yet. So we've got, from The Simpsons, a issue there. Well, at the end, if you don't mind, yeah. I wanted also to just put this one on. This was in 2009, and they predicted, this is the guys at The Simpsons, predicted that there would be a Star Wars film released at the same time as a Chipmunks film. Now what's incredible is that they got the exact date right, December the 18th. So in 2009, they knew that these two films would be released on December the 18th, 2015. Now the accuracy here is beyond any supercomputer. The only way you can obtain accuracy like this is with humans connected to advanced machines. There is no computer either on the planet or off the planet that can model the future like a human. That's what makes humans incredibly special. If you have that ability and you are hooked up to a very advanced machine, it's not 100%, but you can divine the future quite well. So we know what we're looking at here is something of a very advanced nature. This guy, of course, he was destined to be president. My mother, of course, for those of you who remember, who was murdered, and I quite understand why MI5 murdered, so I don't obviously approve, but I understand why they did it. They were left with no choice. But she was done away with in 1979. 3 years prior to that, she was already talking quite openly that this guy was the guy who would become president. He was earmarked for president. Now, he didn't make it. He became the second most powerful man, didn't he? He became the governor of California. Remember that California is a country almost in its right with its gross domestic product. The most important democratic man is the president. It's not then the vice president, unless the president is removed from office. It is the governor of California. So whilst he didn't become president, he became very close. And there are a number of photographs with him with one of the original Bushes. So here we got about future planning and organising, looking at timelines. Remember that Ronald Reagan was in films, he was a cowboy. Remember that Clint Eastwood, who became a governor, was a cowboy. It's not that cowboys become presidents or governors, it's because it's the American psyche of the gun and the hat and the Wild West. If you can ingrain an image with human consciousness, you can then work with that. And it's all about manipulating human consciousness. You know, those of us who are spiritual, and that's everyone in this room, will look at adverts on television and you think, my goodness name, are they spending so much money on packets of crisps or chocolate bars? The point is that people who are not awake and aware take on that image consciously and they share it. Remember, I've talked about a long time ago when humanity was becoming uncontrollable on this planet in terms of the numbers it was producing. And I don't mean that in a negative way. And the energetic life form which we would today call a jinn also existed on the planet. And the human consciousness basically forced the jinn out of the third dimension, wasn't strong enough to push it into the fourth, but stuck it into the interdimensional space that exists between the third and the fourth dimension. So human consciousness can actually have an incredible power. Now the CIA, and to a lesser extent the NSA, understand that, and they will use their agents within our industry or on the internet, on YouTube, to drop in words, key words, and they will then look to see where those keywords re-emerge, and they will then use software to backtrack to see how that concept or idea, which they implanted at point A, made it in the American to point Z, or British point Z, how it transferred across. Who are the individuals who had the ability to influence others? Now, marketing managers have understood that for a long time. You know, we'll use the word McDonald's give free parties to children, not because they like children, but because those children are the customers of the future. So in the same way, the intelligence services, for good or ill, that's not the debate here, it's just what they do. They will implant ideas to see how they're transferred across. So the fact that this guy was earmarked to be president, probably before he was born, is something that awake and aware people couldn't get their head around. There we go, that's really interesting. You've got President Schwarzenegger and you've got Trump waving through the window behind. I really like that. I like it because it was nearly true and it was expected to happen. And the big question is, why didn't it happen? And the reason it didn't happen was because he wasn't as manipulable as they thought. He wasn't quite as controllable as they thought. You don't put someone into high democratic office if they're going to be a John F. Kennedy, because you end up having to kill them, don't you? Can't have someone with a mind. Where's this picture from?
Back to the Future.
Back to the Future. And what does it show? And is anybody not familiar with this picture? Right, okay, no, that's fine. I mean, you know, if you're all familiar with it, I'll go home. 9, 11. Okay, right, well, this is what the tower didn't do. It didn't fell. Look at it. Grand fell. It didn't fell. It didn't fall. It gets worse. Take the L's. There's nobody who's seen this except one person at the conference yesterday. I've been very, very careful what I do because of the reasons I've given. One person came up after the conference. It doesn't mean others didn't spot it, but he came up to me and he said, I got it. I understand what you're saying. And I said, yeah, because I'm trying to be very, very careful with this. So if you look at the L's, and we make the 2 lines with the L's, and it didn't fell, it didn't fall, and then we just look at this, 9/11. I knew, that's why I called for corporate manslaughter the day after this, because I knew something wasn't right. I'm not going to speculate any more on this, but you are now all aware. Let's get on to something else. Teleportation. Anybody got a Star Trek t-shirt on? Well, there was somebody yesterday at the conference, and I said, why on earth didn't you come up? He said, because I'm a bit shy. When we think of teleportation, this is what we think of. It doesn't really work. It sort of works. You need a top and a bottom, but that's not the concept that we have for teleportation. No presents, but can you just tell me the names of the 2 towers that we associate with the Masonic? Thank you. These are the 2 towers. Interesting, isn't it? It's the Twin Towers. Very few people have even put that concept together. But I want you to look at the orbs on the top of them. One represents the sun, one represents the moon, and sometimes you can have a 3rd tower behind you, which represents the stars. But generally we talk about the sun and the moon, the light and the dark, the yin and the yang, positive and negative. And the checkerboard floor underneath, of course, very appropriate. Can you remember what this was about?
Yep.
That's cheating, Peter. Anybody else? What was this one about? Right, Peter?
Well, this is Trump's influence on the Middle East.
Thank you. Yes, this is to do with terrorism and trying to get a number of leaders from the oil-rich nations to support them. I want you to look at the obelisk in the centre. It's really interesting. What's that about?
Is anybody there?
All right, well, it is the earth, and they're all basically dividing up the earth. This is my part, this is your part. We have our hands on the earth. Let's look at that. That's, yeah, I love it, actually. I really do. And even it's considered that one of the towers could contain the earth, and one is the stars, the zodiac. So we have a very strong Freemasonry symbol here, but most people won't understand what's going on.
Wow.
I like that. Yeah. I love it. This is from a university. Their concept of a teleportation device that they could make, theoretically. What's interesting is it's a tube with a sphere on top. Of this planet, but also on this planet in ancient technologies, we talk about Atlantis and Lemuria, there are devices which, not stargates, but they sort of work in the same way, and I haven't got a hands-free mic, and maybe we'll have to invest in hands-free mic here, but basically you put one hand over one of those devices, this hand over there, and you then disappear and appear somewhere else. That is the standard form of teleportation. Now, when you teleport, you can't take anything metal with you. Okay? You can't take anything metal, everything must be made of plastic. And if you think back to the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator films, do you remember that it had to go in naked? Can you remember that? You couldn't take a gun with you. You couldn't take any metal, until the joke with Schwarzenegger was always beating up people to find clothes, and they always fitted. I like that. But this is based on truth, and therefore there are what we call super soldiers, but there are a different sort of super soldiers, have different names, but something like special super soldiers who are still very human, but aren't trained in the same way that you understand super soldiers to be trained. And they're trained by off-planet entities, and when entering through a vortex, there's no air, you see. There's a vacuum in these things, and you can't breathe. So you have a helmet like a motorcycle helmet, and then you have a plastic tube. There's no oxygen bottle. You just have a plastic tube that goes down your throat, and these people have to learn not to try to be sick. So it's a plan of doing that. The tube goes down your throat to about here, and there's enough oxygen contained just in that tube to allow you to pass through the portal out the other end. I remember meeting one of these guys. We'll just go off topic a bit, but we might as well. I remember meeting one of these guys who his job was literally to be taken from the third to the fourth dimension, and then he was one of these special super soldiers. And there is a connection between SS, special super soldiers. And you yourselves know when you meet somebody, you know whether they're genuine or whether they're just making it up because they want limelight. So I said to him, I've seen the weapons that these guys use, and I was testing them out. I have to do this because people will come to me and they'll say this, that and the other. I said, I've seen the weapons, and I said, I don't know where the trigger is. Now on this planet, your trigger of your weapons are here. And he said, oh no, they don't have a trigger. You just squeeze the stock, which is absolutely accurate. And the other thing I asked him, I said, on these weapons and this planet, there's a sight, which is always mounted on the top. But I said, this doesn't seem to be a sight. And he said, oh no, he said, that's the power pack. There's a traffic light system, which is quite right, which is green, full power. This is a laser type weapon. Green, full power, amber, you're running low, and then red, you're out of power. It would probably give you 6 shots or so left. And so he was absolutely genuine, and he was one of these guys that's taken, put into combat and killed, and then reanimated. Now, did anybody remember seeing a original Doctor Who episode called The Robots, or something like the one with the robots? Did anybody see that? Well, when a robot was terminated, it had a disc placed on it. There was a little red disc. And these characters, when they get killed on the battlefield, a disc is placed on them, but they're taken back and brought back to life. But their physical bodies are terribly deteriorated. So they look absolutely worn out and smashed because they've been killed several times. But this is the device that allows them to travel from one location to another. So when people talk about jump rooms and jump chairs, I don't have any experience of jump rooms or jump chairs, but I do have experience of the portal technology, which was in use in Atlantean times. This is ancient technology, and a lot of this ancient technology is far more advanced than some of the off-world technology now. It's quite appropriate for the British government, what's left of it, to make an agreement with the Northern Ireland political groups, and this is such a group, and you will notice the 2 towers either side. That is one of the major reasons that there's been such a huge difficulty to understand and deal with the issues in Northern Ireland, because one of the key groups can trace its history through the Orange Order and has a very strong connection to Freemasonry and to the highest elite. That's why no government has ever attempted to give Northern Ireland over to the Southern government. And so what they're just going to do is wait for a demographic change over the next 50 years for the Catholic population to outnumber the Protestant population, and then through what they would call free and fair elections, then it would just go across. But this is your absolute reason why it's an intransigent political situation under the present terms. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just explaining to you why such a situation has gone on since 1968, when it became very obviously problems. Who's seen this film? Not enough of you. It's going to be a box office flop. And it shouldn't be, because the information here is quite unique, and I enjoyed the film. The latest King Arthur type film. And this is a screenshot from the film. What does that represent? 9/11. Well, actually, you're right, but it does represent something else, because you've got the snake making the 9, yeah, and you've got the tower making the tower. Okay? So for those of you who've not seen the film, there you go. But there's another thing there which is linked in with that. Yes, fantastic. Well done. The eagle and the snake, parallel and key, the two, so they've been intersposed with the 9/11 symbol to show you that the earth is being fought over. So Mexican coins carry the eagle and the snake, and in history we always see the eagle and the snake. Here's a stone carving. I have no idea how old that is. Those of you who went to school like I did can remember your early history lessons where we are shown drawings of Roman soldiers from the ancient Roman Empire carrying the standard Senatus Publicus Quo Romanus SPQR, Senate and People of Rome, and the eagle above it. What we were not taught was that in about 300 AD, the Romans en masse got rid of the eagle and replaced it with the dragon. Now, how many of you were taught that? Because they wanted to push that, one person. We wanted to push it. That's why the eagle appears on American coins. That's why it's part of their symbology. And the symbol, the eagle, has landed. That's why it was called that. So we're seeing the naming of a whole culture after a particular god. So we've got the snake, which is the god that was vilified, who was the bastard son, and I'm using